nice to be here. I learned more about myself from listening to Brandon than I knew about myself this morning. I'm glad to know that I love the Lord that much. That's been on my heart. So that's an encouragement to me, Brandon. So thank you very much. Um, just a little bit of background for all of you. My name is Jim Buckingham. Uh, we spent 26 years in the Army. Ended up at Fort Richardson in 2006 and retired from the Army then. Right about 2005, we had 9 children in our home, and a family, some of you know the Hale family, came to live with us. We had 15 children that came and moved in with us. Hale family's dad had gone to prison. He died in prison. And the last 14, 15 years has been a long history uh, of the Buckingham family and the Hale family and interactions and marriages and all kinds of things, which God has used greatly to humble us and to encourage us and to remind us how He is very much sovereign and in control of all things. And I can tell you where we thought that God had, initially, I can tell the pride of my own heart, I'm sure, early on in that little short history I said was that God is using us to really help some people here. Transferred very quickly into God has used this to humble me and my wife and my family and to teach us of our great need. So that's what God does. He's very good at taking our great aspirations, even if they're great aspirations for Him, and turning them into an opportunity to refine us, to purify us, to conform us to the image of Christ. And He's still very much doing that, because my interaction with and I guess our journey, that's the good word to use today, with this family and our family is still very much very real and very much before my eyes, and very many needs, and it brings me to my knees quite often. So just by way of background, let me just say that God is very able to take a heart that's willing, and I think we are willing, and to bring ministry to you, or to take you to ministry. But in all that process, His primary interest and primary concern, I believe, is to conform us to the image of Christ, to make us more like Himself. And in doing that, He then has a willing heart, a humble servant that He can use in His vineyard and the world in the way that He chooses. So since this is chapel, I thought we'd open the Bible for a minute, Isaiah chapter 6. And I know this is probably a very common passage for some of you. It's the "Here am I, send me" passage. But I just wanted to read a few verses and then just talk about that before we jump into this presentation, because to me, camp and ministry has to be viewed and has to be understood in the context of God's purpose for our lives and His great love for us and His great desire to make us more like Himself. Otherwise, we can be out there doing a lot of things and spinning our wheels and not really be in the center and in the will of God, walking the way He would have us. So let me just read from Isaiah chapter 6, a few thoughts here, maybe 5 minutes, and then we'll jump into this little presentation about camp out at Kako. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw also the Lord sitting upon His throne, or a throne, high and lifted up, and His train filled the temple. And above it stood the seraphims. Each one had 6 wings. With twain He covered His face. That's King James for 2. With twain He covered His feet, and with twain He did fly. And one cried unto another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of His glory. And the posts of the door moved at the voice of him that cried, and the house was filled with smoke. And I would just call our attention here in those first few verses to this, that the most important, first and foremost aspect of our coming to God, of our being forgiven, of our going out and ministering, is that we see the Lord God for who He is. And this is exactly what happened with Isaiah. He saw the Lord high and lifted up. He understood all of a sudden who this God really was. Then said I, and this is the second thing, this is the fallout, woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For mine eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. So when I see the Lord juxtaposed against my meager person, I recognize that He is indeed the sovereign God. He's the high and lifted up one, and that brings about in me this sense of humility and need and sinfulness that caused me to cry out, woe is me. Lord, I need You. Lord, I am in trouble. It's not just that I recognize that he has a great plan for my life, and that he wants to give me an abundant and full life, and that having Jesus is going to mean all kinds of good things for me. It's first and foremost that I see him for who he is, and I recognize I'm at his disposal, and that I first need to come to him with that attitude. So he says, "Woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips," and he sees his sin and recognizes that he can't hide that from a living God. Verse 6, "Then flew one of the seraphims unto me, having a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with the tongs off the altar. And he laid it upon my mouth, and he said, Lo, this hath touched thy lips, and thine iniquity is taken away, and thy sin purged." And so the sequence again, as I see God, I'm humbled in my heart, and God recognizing my humility and recognizing that he dwells with those who are of a humble and contrite heart, then comes and applies this forgiveness that we now see this side of the cross comes through the person of Jesus Christ. And he forgives me. He takes away my sin. And having my sin taken away, he laid it upon my mouth. He's touched my lips. Thine iniquity is taken away, and thy sin purged. And that release, that sense of being now, like Romans chapter 5 says, at peace with God, I now have opportunity to look to God and say, then what would you have me do? But first, from verse 8, also I heard the voice of the Lord, God having orchestrated this whole process, opening Isaiah's eyes to who he was, seeing him humbled and choosing to humble himself, purposing to forgive him, then says, whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And so God asks the question, where is your heart? And what is your desire? And is your heart after me? Is your heart after the things that are important to me? Are you interested in my will for you? Are you interested in your will for yourself? And he says, then said I, here am I, send me. And he said, go. This is God again speaking. Now you are willing, you are able. He says, go. He said, and tell this people, hear ye indeed, but understand not, and see ye indeed, but perceive not. And I'm sure part of the intent there was not just to go and tell all the people that God can forgive you, but it's to go and inform, communicate to the people, show the people who this God is, so that that process happens in the heart of those other ones that hear, that they see their sin and they recognize their need for a living God, and they humble themselves, and God then can come and apply that cleansing through the person of Christ to my heart, and he can then extract from me that proper response to what do you want me to do? How do you want me to respond? Where do you want me to go? Or do you want me to stay? In fact, I'm very much, I have been in the throes of that for the last 6 months, just trying to discern, Lord. We've had 26 years in the Army, and now we've had 14 or 15 years of managing, loving, working through issues with a very large family. And that's sort of coming to an end. What now would you have us do? I mean, here we are. In fact, at the point where the Hale family came into our home, we were just prepared, leaving the Army, to move out to a village in Alaska. That's where we were headed. And the Lord put the brakes on that and said, you're not going anywhere. I have something else in mind for you right now. And so we had to switch gears and say, okay, Lord, what is that going to look like? Okay, so that's pretty much it by way of a little background. I wanted to ask, how many of you are staff here at Alaska Bible College? And how many of you are students here? Okay, that's good. That helps me. And how many of you have been in Alaska for more than 20 years? Cassie, all right. All right, Jubal, how about another one? How about 15? Anybody been here more than 15 years? All right, how about 10 years? 10 or more. You can keep, everybody put your hand, 10 or more years, so I can just say, okay, how many of you have been here less than 2 years in Alaska? Okay, good, that gives a good sense. How many of you have been to a rural Alaskan village? How many of you have not been to a rural Alaskan village? Okay. Nothing wrong with that. I hadn't either until we came here back in 1997 for the first time, and it came to this area in 97. I'm sorry, Fairbanks in 97, and started visiting some Alaskan villages. How many of you have lived in a village for more than 3 months? Okay, I know Eugene has. Eugene and I go back a little ways also. So, okay, and how many of you prefer to sit in the front seat if you have an option? I figure the answer to that is probably pretty obvious. So, all right. So with that, what I'd like to do is I want to tell you a little bit about Kako. We came up here in 2003, and pretty soon after that, I can't even remember exactly how we got involved with Kako Retreat Center. I'm going to show you where it is, what it is here in just a minute. On and off over the years, we went out to Kako with our family, and with this portions of this very large family that we had. Every couple, 3 years, we'd go out there and serve and do something, serve on staff, be counselors, whatever. How many of you know Kyle Stevens or are familiar with the name? Okay, so Kyle Stevens is from California. He has a number of brothers and sisters. 2 of his sisters married 2 of my sons. One was a biological son, one was a Hale son. He felt very much called of the Lord here several years ago, and he's been working with Kako for a while, to go out and take up full-time residence there with he and his wife Ella and their 2 children. In the fall of 2017, I got an email from Kyle because we were in touch with Kako a lot, and he said we've had a big problem. We had the dam sort of break, and this little lake area, pond area, just flooded the area, took out our water treatment plant almost, and some other things. We really need some help. And so over the course of about 3 or 4 days, we rounded up about 4 or 5 people from church, and we headed out there. We landed in Bethel, and Jonathan Penns, who's the executive director of Kako Retreat Center, and Kyle, both in separate planes, launched out from Kako about 45 minutes away to come pick us up. Jonathan landed there about 1 o'clock, and Kyle was right behind him, supposedly. About 1:32, we started getting concerned. He didn't land, and the long and short of it was that he ended up crashing in the Yukon River and dying in about October of 2017. It had a huge impact on my family because 2 of his sisters were married to my sons, and of course an immediate impact because we were there waiting for him and went through all this process of the next 2 or 3 days trying to search for him and find him, and eventually they found the wreckage of his plane there in the Yukon. He had been very clearly called to go to Kako. He was doing what the Lord wanted him to do. He was in the right spot at the right time, and the Lord just figured it was time for Kyle to come home. Well, the fallout of that was they were lacking a camp director because Kyle was directing camp. And the following year, they brought in another young man who's a good friend of mine, John Erickson, and he directed camp in 2018. And then last year, I was actually with my family overseas in Israel because I have a daughter and son who are missionaries over there, son-in-law. And we were over there for 3 years helping them in their ministry over there in Israel. And got an email from Jonathan asking if I would consider directing camp last year. So we did that. And we went out with our family, at the time 9 of us, and we're out there for 2 months, June and July. And Jonathan felt encouraged, called to ask me to do the same thing this summer. So what I'd like to do is present to you a little bit about what Kako is about. I'm not here to solicit funds. What I'm really here for is to see if the Lord might be calling or interesting any of you young people to come out and help on staff or counselors out at Kako. There's a great need, I will tell you, and this will become pretty obvious, I think, as we go. Some of you that have been to villages or lived there understand the need very clearly. Many of you have probably heard about it and recognized that, in fact, we have a huge mission field in our backyard and a lot of very clear, difficult issues and situations to be addressed. So that's what this is about. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where it is, who we serve, a little bit of the history, very short, vision, facilities, activities, and opportunities. Okay, next slide. So this is what happens every morning on Monday morning for the first 6 weeks of camp. We launch out from our dogleg runway and head out and start picking up kids in the area. All of our children come in by plane. That's Kako's 206. Straight ahead is the Yukon River, about a 4-minute flight, and off 45 degrees to the right is Russian Mission. And we have 6 weeks of camp. It goes Monday through Friday. We fly the kids in on Monday, and they're there for full-time Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. They leave again on Friday. We fly them all back out again. It's not atypical in fact, it's fairly normal for children to come in on Monday to be somewhat wary. Who are these people, especially if they haven't been there before? They're leaving not a stable situation, but they're leaving a known situation into an unknown situation. By Tuesday, Wednesday, something like that, they start warming up to their counselors. And by Friday, when they're getting in the plane to go, many of them, honestly, are in tears in the back of the plane because they know now what they're going back to. And they've seen the juxtaposition of life where people love them and care for them. and they know what they're headed back into, and it's pretty tough. Okay, next one. So Alaska on the left, and you can see Anchorage there in the middle. 400 miles west of us is Bethel, Alaska, a hub for aviation and for all kinds of things. Fairly large village, remote village. Down here is the Kuskokwim River in the red, Bethel at the bottom of the circle. Russian Mission is a 40-minute flight north. And you go into the next slide. That's Russian Mission again, the Yukon River, and Kako, which is about a 7-minute flight up into the hills. I wouldn't really call them mountains out there, but up into the hills north of Bethel. Okay, next one, that's a Google Earth picture. You can see our sort of dog-leg runway. That runway, top left to bottom right, continues on a 6-mile road. That's probably too good of a term to use. It's a, it's a trail that can be used as a road when it's good, and it goes down to the Yukon River, which is where we pick up stuff from the barge to bring in fuel and supplies and things like that. Okay, that is from the top of what we call Kako Mountain that we hike up with the kids every week, 45-minute hike up, and we just spend some time up there. There's a cross on top of the mountain. You'll see a picture of that in a minute. We come back down and have a hot dog cookout, etc. But that is pretty much the extent of the facilities over here on the left. And I've got a little better picture that'll show that in a minute. Okay, next. So that's reaching out 80-mile radius in a small circle, 160-mile radius in the large circle. We go all the way out to Hooper Bay. And any of those villages within there where there are children that want to come, we try to service them, try to bring them in. There's about 20 villages you'll see there on the list. And there's a few more in there, but those are primary ones that we try to bring in, okay? So it's a little small there, but we primarily bring in elementary, junior high, and teens. We have 2 elementary weeks, 3 junior high weeks, and 1 teen week over the course of the summer. We don't do them in that order. We mix them up a little bit. You know, the children come from, all of them from rural villages. The way I sometimes have pictured this in my own mind, it's pretty much all of the potential difficulties you would have in the inner city. The only difference is you're in a rural setting. And so alcohol, drugs, immorality, incest, suicide, broken families, dysfunctional families, very difficult relationships is all right there. And most of these children have seen and experienced far more than, you know, those of us that may have grown up in a white Christian home somewhere, or even in a white suburban neighborhood somewhere, even touched. I mean, things we read about, thought about, but they've been in it, lived in it, immersed in it. Is that fair to say, Eugene? Most of them know very little of a loving dad and mom. I mean, the standard family, I would say, typically is children are living with their some relative, and they've got lots of relatives, usually lots and lots of cousins, usually with a grandmother, grandfather. They'll be with their parents also, but the family usually has some, I mean, on the whole, has some aspect of real deep dysfunctionality in it, so that they may be cared for and provided for. And in some cases, they are, I'm sure, greatly loved and appreciated, but very often they're from really, really hard places. What can we give them in 4 days at Kako? I had to ask myself this question last spring since I was going to be directing camp. You know, I've raised a lot of children, and I used to say, you know, if I can have a child in my house for 18 years and they don't leave the door with a passion for Jesus Christ, what can I do for 3 or 4 days in the life of a young person that comes to camp? And it's a good question to ask. And we pour our life into children for a long time. And we trust and pray that they will choose Christ, and that the Lord will be more than just their parents' religion to them, but that He will be their Savior. He will be their friend. He will be their confidant, and they will follow Him all the days of their life. And it doesn't always happen that way. So in 3 or 4 days, I think what we can do is we can take a child and we can demonstrate the love of Christ. We can spend time with them. We can show them the love of God just by showing interest in their life and by not reacting to their very negative responses all the time. We can present them with the gospel of Jesus Christ so that they've heard it, and we can try to live out that gospel as best we're able. And if nothing else, they can walk away with a sense that there is hope. Now, they may not really fully understand it, and living 3 or 4 days at Kako or any kind of camp and going back home into the things that they normally face is daunting. And what's really needed, I think, is real, honest, genuine, regular follow-up, with these young people, because it's a very hard go at life. Okay, let's look at the next one. So there's a little video. I'm going to turn the sound up. It's about 8 minutes, and give you a little picture of what we do. We make one of these at the end of each camp week. Some of the staff does, but it'll give you a little sense of what we do. If you see anybody non-native, probably staff. Yeah, we have a 4th of May to celebrate 4th of July. Skits. Cooks.
My sin remained a dirty stain, my good could not erase. Then Jesus came, my sin he claimed, and cleansed me by his grace. To Christ I fly, on him rely. His grace is all I need. Unmoved by doubts, my faith cries out, Christ is enough for me. My crippling fears are so severe, I stumble on my way. Yet Jesus keeps and never sleeps, his right hand holds me safe. My hurting heart is torn apart by unrelenting pain. Still Jesus cares, my suffering shares, his favor never fades. To Christ I fly, on him rely. His grace is all I need. Unmoved by doubts, my faith cries out, Christ is enough for me. My feeble might will lose the fight against the devil's schemes. But Jesus rose to crush my foe and live his life in me. To Christ I fly, on him rely. His grace is all I need. Unmoved by doubts, my faith cries out, Christ is enough for me. Unmoved by doubts, my faith cries out, Christ is enough for Christ is enough. Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough.
Okay, so that gives you a little picture of things. Or you can go to the next slide there. We'll jump over. So just a quick bit on background. Dave and Vera Penns. See this screen. It's not. Dave and Vera Penns on the left side headed up Kako for about 26 years. Dave was sort of the initiator of this whole camp. It's in an old mine, about 5-6 miles from the Yukon River. From about 88 until he died in 2014. After that, his son Jonathan on the right side there with his wife Sharon and 2 children have been overseeing the camp. Okay. So a little bit on vision: Christ-centered camping, retreats, seminars, counseling to the people in the rural villages, remote villages, primarily of Western Alaska here. The primary things that Kako Retreat Center does are the 3 things on the screen. They do a family camp in May. We do 6 weeks of children's camp in June and July, and then there's a ladies' berry picking retreat, which is primarily a long weekend where they bring in a lot of ladies from villages around and they pick berries up in the mountain and just spend good time speaking with them. Okay? So the facilities. Let's see. Let's start with the lodge, top left up there. That's where we meet for food, and that's where we meet for all of our meetings. Below that and to the left, you'll see 4 houses. We number them 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then 4 more continuing down the runway, 5, 6, 7, and 8. That's where we put guy staff, girl staff, families that are living there permanently, like Jonathan and Sharon Penns, and families that come in to help, like my family, and any visitors that come in. We have a zip line over the lake up there in the north, or the top of the picture, a snack shack, a craft barn, a little swimming pool, above ground pool, hangar, metal shop, wood shop. It's completely off the grid, so we have our own generator, which powers everything. We do have a satellite connected internet and Wi-Fi, although it's very expensive to get any kind of rates that are useful, but there is some contact with people back home, and there's a telephone that works to call out also. I think that's pretty much it. This again is the north end or west end of the runway that continues on down into the road that goes down to the river. Yes, that's right. Rappelling tower right north of that top right red circle. Right. Okay, next. That's the lodge from the outside, lining up for meals, which we do 3 times a day. Okay. One of those 8 houses I was just talking about. Kako is not a refined, polished summer church camp. It is very rustic and it's very remote. And it's very beautiful in that way also. I mean, you go up on the mountain and there is nothing but tundra for hundreds of miles. And it's a wonderful place just to go and to be quiet, actually, when you can get outside of the camp boundaries. But it's a very beautiful remote place. But the facilities there are in constant need of upkeep and repair, and so that's constantly being worked on. And there is good water and a good septic and electricity. So those primary things are in place. We've got a good place to feed everybody. Okay, that's the rappelling tower. Next, just a little bit on our schedule. If you look up at the top row, besides the dates, there are Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Monday, campers arrive. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, full days of camp. Friday, they depart. Saturday, we reset and do some work around the place for about a half a day. And then in the afternoon, people pretty much go out and do, adventurous stuff or take a rest or whatever. If they've been counseling, I guarantee you they take a rest. And the Sunday we have church, and then we have a rest day the rest of Sunday. Notice in the red boxes there, we have about 7 Bible times. Those are about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes each. We do that once on Monday night and then twice a day, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So they get a lot of time in Scripture. Okay, next. That's our activity schedule, which changes now and then. But generally, if you look again at the left column there, those are the cabin names. We have 4 girl cabins and 4 guy cabins. They're about 10 by 12 cabins, very rustic. Nothing inside of them except for some mats to throw out on the floor, and usually 1 bed that the counselor sleeps on, if at all. And we rotate between rifle, archery, canoeing, trampoline, just open time to walk around and do what you want. Zip line, and we do some rappelling, airsoft. Those are the primary activities we have, and usually try to introduce something new every year. Okay? This is up to the top of the cross, which is that mountain just beyond everybody, and down below is where Kako is, and out on the horizon there is the Yukon River. You can see a little picture of it to the left of that horizontal member of the cross up there. But we hike up there every Wednesday, bring the whole group up and do different stuff up there, shoot off rockets or whatever. Mainly it's a chance to get everybody out. Okay, next. A couple of pictures just to give you a little more sense. That's the tundra up behind the mountain where we were just by the cross. That was my 2 little guys. Okay. We bring supplies in from Russian Mission. A lot of that comes through bypass mail, lands on the runway. We go in and pick it up and bring it up. Next. That's our kitchen. That's one of my daughters who was out there a couple years ago. Okay, next. That's my wife. Every week she would prepare at the end on Friday packets for the kids that had memory verses, pictures, candy, all kinds of stuff, and hand them to the kids as they got in the plane. So something to remember the week by and remember the people that they were with. Okay. This is 83-year-old former missionary pilot now helping out at Kako, Gordon Backey. He served with MAF for a number of years and still flying actively. Going to come back up this summer with his 172 and help fly. Okay. That's waiting at the runway, get ready to go home. That's a pretty typical shot, getting your little packet waiting there for the planes to go. Next. 4-wheeler and little trailer to haul stuff to and from the planes. Next. And opportunities. So this is pretty much next to last slide. What I really am looking for, and I've got a few applications up here, and I'll show you a slide that has some contact information at the end, is I'm interested to see whether God might be tugging at any of your hearts to come out and help. That's really what I'm after here. I like to put out the fleece, as it were, put out the opportunity, and let God just do what He's going to do. But we need young people that have a heart after God and that really are interested in working with these young children for a period. Counseling is extremely taxing. It goes from Monday, you're full time with the kids, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and you are exhausted at the end, primarily because they don't let you go to sleep until 1 or 1:30, and they're drinking soda and eating candy and having all kinds of fun. And it's very hard to break away and just try to go to sleep. So they're pretty exhausted by the end. Um, I also need staff. I need people to help with everything from helping in the kitchen to helping clean up to helping with construction activities now and then to just filling in with activities. So we're looking for people like that also. A&P mechanics, vehicle, ATV, heavy equipment mechanics. There's a lot of equipment out there that needs a lot of help. And we try to get it as good as we can, prior to the start of the season. But there's always plenty of things to fix. So what I try to do is I'm normally looking for individuals, but also give place to couples and or families if it works, if it fits somehow. And for individuals, I'm trying to find young people who would like to commit either to the first 3 weeks or the last 3 weeks. And the first 3 weeks, you'll notice, goes from about the 3rd of June until the 27th of June. Second 3 weeks, 24th of June to the 18th of July, or for the whole 6 weeks. And the reason I try to do that is to keep there from being so much turnover. It's pretty disruptive logistically for us to be sending people out all the time to Bethel on planes to go pick up more staff to come in and sort of get you trained up. So it's better if we can get you in 3 weeks or 3 weeks or for the whole 6 weeks. So that's what we try to do. But I have brought people in for shorter periods of time if they're available and want to come help. And we'll take those and either consider staff and or counseling is primarily the thing. There is an application process, and it's not onerous, but it is somewhat invasive. In other words, I mean, not in a bad way, but my interest is I'd like to know a little bit about your heart and about if where you are with the Lord, and a little bit about what your background is. And since you guys are close by, if you want to fill out an application and send it up to me. I live right up here on Lazy Mountain. I'd probably get together with you and sit down and want to talk for a few minutes and just find out where your heart is and all this. But that's the opportunity that's out there. I'm trying to get applications in by the middle of March. So if you don't know what you're doing yet this summer and you have heard this and the Lord may be pulling a little bit on maybe there's some opportunities there, then I would really encourage you to consider it because we could definitely use you. Okay, next. So that's the contact information. Probably the best thing you can do is either email me at Kako Camp Director, pretty easy to remember, Kako Camp Director at Gmail. There's a website. It's not a great website, but it's working. There's a few things that are a little old on there, but it's just KakoRetreatCenter.org. And there are some links on there also if you go under summer camp to find the application. So there's the application on there as well if you don't take one with you. And with that, I will, if you have any time, I'm happy to answer any questions or whatever you'd like to do, Brandon.
It's about this time of the semester where we're getting closer and closer to halfway through the semester, right? I know we're already almost there. But like the last question on that list that we talked about, what are your plans for the summer in order to keep pursuing Jesus, in order to keep growing? It's this time of the semester that we like to present an opportunity for you to intentionally take that step of faith and move forward and say, I'm going to do something outside of my comfort zone, do something a little bit different than I've done before, and try to pursue Jesus in this realm. So I want you guys to intentionally just take a moment and think about if this would be an option for you. ABC has partnered with Kako Camp many times in the future and or in the past, and hopefully will in the future. But also through Alaska Inreach, we have some partnership with Kako and with Jonathan Garland going out there a couple of times. So this is a ministry that we love and trust, and we hope you would as well. So I just encourage you, challenge you, consider this about this for your summer. If you have questions, I'm sure Jim may be willing to stick around for a minute or two and answer some of your questions after the application. But it doesn't hurt to take an application. Think about it, pray about it. Be grateful for your opportunity. But other than that, like I said, feel free to ask him any questions you have after the application. Thanks for being here this morning.
There's 6 applications on the piano. I didn't print a lot of them, but you can get it online there pretty easily too. So
Like I
feel
said,
free to take one if you'd like.
Like he said, he lives close, and
Thank you, everybody.
Of sin and darkness.